All right. Okay, so we are working with two images right now on this one. Um, if you've seen the final, it's in the files that you had downloaded, but we have this cows.psd file, obviously, cows, and then we have this ufo.jpg image. So these are the two that we're going to kind of be messing around with and creating a composition out of. So the difference between these two is that the cows piece is CMYK in color mode, and then we have the UFO piece in RGB color mode. So the first thing we'll want to do is bring them both to the same type of color mode. So let's do that real quick. I'm going to go to image mode, CMYK for the UFO piece. So I'm going to open up this history palette and just kind of see what happened here. Otherwise, I can just do a Command Z or Control Z to undo and redo. The thing to note about the undo button in Photoshop is that you can only go back one step. So it makes the history palette that much more important. You can't really undo multiple times. You can only just undo it once. That's unique to Photoshop, but that's an unfortunate thing. But it's kind of the nature of the beast. So I'm just going to go back and forth here and see kind of what happened. We got, I guess, a little bit of that light kind of got a little brighter, but it's not that bad. So next I want to unlock this background. So this way I'll be able to kind of excuse me, separate these UFOs, because basically my composition, I want to bring some UFOs into the background for these cows. So to do that, let me go ahead and go to my image size panel to see what's happening here. So we are at 72 dpi and 41 inches. So what I can do then is just increase the resolution, and as I do that, you'll see my width and height kind of adjust. Oh, actually it won't. Hold on, let me cancel that and redo it. I need to go uncheck this resample box. Sometimes I'll forget to do that. So if I hit resample and then make sure it's unchecked, then if I hit 300 dpi, that's our optimal print resolution, then it's going to go down a little bit in width. So that's what we want. Reason being is that it's going to basically, since it was at a low resolution and a higher size, a higher resolution will bring the size lower of the image itself. One of the things, let me see what we have going on here. So this ended up being, in the image size panel again, 10 inches wide. Okay. Now this image ends up being 12 inches wide. So the UFO, when I drag it over, let me see, is going to be smaller, so I can actually just take my rectangle tool and just kind of encircle the UFO that I'm looking at, and then I'll kind of just drag it over. This is going to be probably maybe the right size. Yeah, it's pretty decent. I can make it like a little bit bigger. Okay, so I'll just bring it up because I want it to be maybe about, I don't know, an inch or so wider. So I'll let's see, try doing, cancel, image size, keep that off, and then bring it to like 15, and then hit OK. So my resolution did get smaller because of that width change. And then when I'll hit the resample button again, and then I'll just do 300, so that I'll decrease the quality just a little bit, but it's going to be hardly noticeable. But it will get it a little bigger, which is what we kind of want. And typically I'll go like at 100% and just visually look at it. It looks fine. So now I'll kind of get a sense as I drag and drop in sort of what that size is going to be. Let me try that again. Yeah, that's pretty much where I want it to be. At this point, I'm just gonna try and figure out what's the best way to kind of cut this thing out. Keep in mind we have this like light shimmer thing that we want to keep too. So how to cut that out is gonna take a little bit of a couple of different selection tools. So the first one I'm gonna kind of select is this magnetic lasso. And again, that is kind of a nice quick solution to select the gist of it. As I'm zooming in here, I'm actually clicking Command plus or Command minus to zoom in without actually having to click on it at all. So that's a good quick way to zoom in. Again, I'm hitting spacebar and my hand tool is popping up and I'm clicking and dragging to kind of keep moving along here along the edge before I reach the end here so that I can actually see what is happening and what I'm doing. So I'm kind of roughing it in with this magnetic lasso. I'm obviously missing some stuff, which is fine, but this gets the most of it. This part is going to be kind of a little bit wild in the selecting. But again, it's not perfect, but that's okay. So what I can do is use my pen tool to select as well. So this is another method of selecting more refined pieces of your stuff. So I'll hit that that pen tool, and then I'll go back through, and then I'll actually start drawing points and paths to kind of refine the selection, very much like Illustrator. Again, this is just points and paths I'm drawing out here, coming around. So kind of picking up the stuff that I didn't quite catch. So I'm coming back around. I'm going to complete the shape. And so what this shape is called is really a path. It's a work path. So if I hit my paths palette here, you can see a little piece of that shape that's called the work path shape. I'm going to hit this menu, and I'm going to hit Make Selection. So what that's going to do is actually create a selection out of the path. You can feather it, so feathering meaning it's going to add a blur to that edge. We don't want to blur to this edge. In this case, we just want it to be a real solid, clean cut line of selecting, or selection, if you will. The only other piece here to keep in mind is that with this work path that we're creating a new custom selection out of, we can do a couple things. We can add to the selection that's currently existing, right? So whatever we selected with the magic wand can be added to, which is exactly what we want to do. You can also subtract from the selection, which I'll show you, and then the intersect with selection, which is basically going to show the overlap between the two selections will be selected after you chose that. Or new selection, that's just going to deselect what we currently have selected based on the current magnetic lasso tool selection, and it's just going to select very simply what exactly we have as the path. We want to just do add to selection. This is equivalent of holding down the shift key and basically selecting something with any other selection tool that we have. So you can see now it added a little bit, it kind of cleaned up my selection, and I'll just kind of do it again. Okay, so I'm continuing to add here. With the pen tool, if you kind of make a mistake like this, you can hit undo. It'll undrop the point, and if you hit undo again, remember we can only undo back one step, so I'm undoing, and it's going back and redoing. So I'm going to undo, and then I can actually hit the delete key, and then that'll go back even more steps. So so I will continue on here. Now see, now I'm going to have to actually deselect those pieces because I kind of went the reverse way that I need to. But right now I'm going to select just the stuff that I want to add to my selection here. So just this kind of arc here, come around here. This is probably one of my favorite ways of selecting, but it's definitely not the only way. In addition to the other ways that I've showed, there are even more ways. All right, so let me just go ahead and make the selection again. Add to. All right, so it added two. And this piece I'm going to have to redo. Nope. Actually, if I want to adjust the curve of this, I can actually go over this point where you see it kind of has this little line that shows up when I go over that point. If I hit Alt, click, and drag, I can actually change like the angle of the tool to just kind of refine my angles as well. Basically exactly like Illustrator too, with the pen tool, and then just kind of complete the shape again, and then make selection, add to. And then we're going to do kind of the vice versa, right? So we're going to deselect some of the stuff that I kind of went overboard with here. So I'll just go and make my pen selection here on this edge, complete the shape, and then instead of adding to selection, I'm going to subtract from selection. So I'll subtract that little sliver, and then it'll kind of make it more perfect. Here's another piece. Otherwise, if I don't want to spend too much time on it, I can actually just do the lasso tool. And instead of holding Shift to add the selection, see how my plus sign's coming up? I'm going to do Alt, and that'll actually remove the selection too. So I can go through here with the Alt key down when I click and drag and come around, and then that just minus that little piece there. All right. So at this point, what I want to do is kind of get as much of this kind of light stuff as I can and bring it in over as well. So what I want to do is actually show you this quick mask mode editing. So down here it says edit in quick mask mode when I hover over this little shape. Let me see if it pops up real quick. There we go. You can get into there by pressing Q. It kind of gives you the little shortcut there. But what that's going to do is show me what is selected, and what is selected is basically not red here. So this is a good way to see what you have selected in kind of a preview without kind of having to squint your eyes and look at these little marching ant things. So you can jump in and out of this mode. If I actually, what happened there is I just double clicked it and I went into this quick mask mode options where I can adjust the opacity of the color of my, the areas that the color is indicating. So right now it's indicating the masked areas or what I want cut out of the background. So I just changed the color to green. You can kind of pick whatever color makes you happy. Otherwise, what I like to do is just select the selected areas. So then I'll hit OK. So now what's being colored in here is what is actually selected. So the reason why I'm doing that is because you can actually use brush tools as a selection tool as well. So let me hit OK. Make sure my layer's selected. So see, I hit the shortcut B, and let me see. So that will pull up this brush tool here. So let me kind of just show you how to use this as a selection tool. So by hitting B or selecting the brush tool, you get all these different kind of options up here. And this is kind of the variable palette that all these things kind of change in, all these options. So you can kind of hit this drop down and adjust the hardness or the softness of your brush. So you can see up where the 100 is showing. See how like my hardness is all the way up, right? And it kind of has more of a solid edge, but when I bring it down, it makes it more softer on the edge. That basically is almost similar to adjusting the feather of your selection via this brush. You can also adjust the brush size like this. So, make it, super giant or a lot smaller. I use the two keyboard shortcuts for adjusting the size of the brush typically. It's what is the left and right bracket key on your keyboard. So if I left bracket key this, you'll see my little brush is getting smaller, and then if I right bracket it, it's getting a lot bigger now. So right bracket, left bracket, that's your real quick shortcuts for that. Another thing to keep in mind on this brush is that you can adjust the opacity. So this is going to feather the edge of this selection. So if I bring my opacity to 50% and kind of left bracket click this, now I'm kind of very faintly seeing a selection here. So I have, when I brush, let me undo that. Let me bring it down a little bit more. When I brush at a smaller opacity, you can see that it's real faded out here, okay? And when I click and go over my steps, it'll kind of get more and more saturated or more and more opaque. That's kind of the effect that I want because some of this light kind of fades off. So if I want to get a real accurate kind of sense of this selection, I'll just kind of keep clicking and dragging. Otherwise, I can really bring it up to like 75%, a higher percentage, and really lay the selection on thick towards the basically the inner parts of this burst, and then kind of lower the opacity as I work my way out. So kind of wanting to get just a sense of a little bit of that. It's not going to be perfect, but now if I turn my quick mask mode off, you can see that it's showing me a little bit of what I have selected here already. So I think I'm happy with it, so I'm going to click and drag this out and then bring this to my cowl layer here. So check it out here. You see how kind of where I was brushing, it's not solid. You see how like this edge is super solid and everything. This is really why we're kind of affecting the opacity of the selection, because it's giving us the opportunity to kind of not be so hard edged with our selection. And it really helps us feather that edge too in a more natural way. So for you illustrators and stuff, you can certainly select things just with like a tablet pen tool or something like that. You can definitely do that as well. Let's see. So one of the things that I want to do with this image is actually separate this little faded starburst piece from the UFO itself, because what I want to do is kind of blend it in a little bit more than where it's blended in now. So one of the things I'm going to do, again, is I'm going to really kind of cheat my way through this. I'm going to jump to another tool here. I'm going to hit this rectangle tool and just bring it around the entire piece. Hit my move tool and just click and drag. Now you can see my pieces selected to the pixel exactly. Now I'm going to again jump into my pen tool. Alright, so I'll hit P, that's the shortcut for the pen tool. Hitting Command plus to zoom in here, holding my spacebar key, clicking and dragging, so I'm moving around here to kind of get a real close look, and then drawing, using my pen tool to retrace some of this. And I want to actually separate the area at which the starburst, or I guess I'm calling it a starburst, but yeah, it's pretty appropriate. So like this kind of a lens flare apparently area, and I'm just kind of circling it around here with my pen tool, and I'm going to go over to my paths palette, make sure my work path is selected, use my drop down, make selection, and subtract from selection, hit OK. Okay. Go back to my layers, and now I'm going to go to Edit, and I'm going to copy, Edit, cut. Now I cut that piece out. I'm going to go down to my layers palette here and create a new layer with this little swatch icon. On layer 2, then I'll go to Edit, Paste. Okay. An even better way of doing that, instead of just a regular paste, in Photoshop you can also go Edit, Paste Special, Paste in place, and that's going to place it exactly where it started, or where I pulled it from and copied it from. All the keyboard shortcuts for copy, cut, paste, Command C is copy, Command X is cut, and Command V is paste. So all of those little moves that I did in the menu could just be 3 quick shortcuts, Command C, Command X, Command V. But to paste special, you actually have to come into this menu and look. It's a Command Shift V. So that's particularly one shortcut that I've never memorized, but it's probably good to memorize that if you wanted to. So the reason why I'm separating this is because I see kind of this like dark piece here. It kind of looks really fake with this little starburst. So what I want to do is first I'll name this layer, right, this starburst. And I'll name this UFO 1. Okay, so the starburst piece, what I want to do is actually use a layer blending mode on it. So every layer that you have in Photoshop, you can apply a blending mode, and it's in the layers palette, and you see it here as normal. If you use this drop down with the layer you want to blend selected, you can pick any of these options here, and they do a different thing. They blend it in a different way. This is a very experimental part of Photoshop. You can click and something won't work, or you can click and something will work. So a lot of this is very kind of testing, clicking, and seeing what works. So really the goal for this piece is to make it kind of get rid of kind of this darker edges that we had from our original background and kind of lighten it up. So I think lighten works. You can see that it blends pretty well. And then I'll be good with that. So if I select, to select multiple layers, I have one layer selected. And if I hold Shift and click another layer, I'll have 2 layers selected. So again, on my palette, remember these were cut from each other. I can move them now together. What I can do is hit Command G, and that will group that. Okay, so I'll call this UFO 1. So these 2 layers now are a group within my layers palette. Okay. This comes in handy later on, probably even more. So what I'll do with this group of layers is select that folder and then go to Edit, Transform, and then hit Scale. Okay, so the Transform tool, if you hit Scale, will allow you to move this thing around and then really resize a little bit too. So if I click and drag it, I'm just going to kind of bring it down just a little bit in size. Now this tool, when you use it, you always want to resize down. You don't want to resize up, because if you resize up, then it's going to reduce the quality. Okay, so that's a really important point. When you want to size up, use the image size process that we went through before. If you want to resize down, feel free to resize down any raster image you see like this. Okay, different from a vector image. A vector image you can size up or size down at your heart's desire. But when you're dealing with these raster pixel-based graphics, you'll have to keep that in mind. Sizing it up will be an image size process that we went through earlier. Sizing down, you can just very simply transform. A quick way to jump to your transform tool as well is Command T. Command T will transform as well. If I kind of hover on the outside here of my image box, you can see my arrow pointer kind of looks like a curved arrow now. And now I can kind of rotate it side to side. And then I can even bring it down at the corner. You can see that when I size from the corner, I can kind of squeeze this thing. That's because I don't have my Shift key held. So if I hold Shift, just like any other shape in Illustrator, I can constrain the proportions of it. So I'm holding Shift and releasing and constraining those proportions like that. All right. So there's my first little piece of that image. Let's see, what else did I want to do? I wanted to actually duplicate this, right? So I'm going to, well, first, the things I really want to do is actually show you how, let's see, I want to show you some other tools too. Let me quick adjust the backgrounds. Every time I work with an image, I'll always jump into selective color or some of the other menus I'll show you. But we're dealing with the cows layer right now. And what I like to do is always kind of just beef up the color a little bit in one way, shape, or form from the original, but not overly, because you don't typically want to over Photoshop something. People can see if something's been over Photoshopped a lot easily, or pretty easily. So I'll always kind of just do little tweaks here and there, kind of turn the preview on and off just to make sure I'm not going overboard. And so on and so forth. I'm keeping it real realistic. So here I'm kind of wanting to make the grass a little bit greener. Another thing I'll do to all photos that I bring in, just as a process thing, is under Image Adjustments again. I'll go over to Levels. Levels is, and I'll pull this palette up here. Levels is a palette that's going to allow you to increase the contrast. Well, I shouldn't say contrast because there's another contrast option, but the lights and darks of an image and the midtones. So here are the darks. So they're represented on this side of the slider. If I actually pull this, it's going to beef up all of the darks in the image. So you can actually see, here's an extreme example, kind of what it's doing here. So I'll always kind of bring it, and sort of like where this starts to increase in the midtones, I'll kind of bring the darks up. Even if you can't hardly, even if you can't really hardly tell, it still helps to have that do something. Because see, now I'm turning it on and off, it kind of gives it a little more contrast, a little more of the dark shadows. And then the lights as well, I'll kind of bring these in a little bit too. So I'll kind of bring them in just a tiny bit. This image is pretty bright. As you can see, there's a lot of increase here. So I'll kind of bring it just a tiny bit, just a real subtle change. And it just helps the image a little bit. And here's your midtones. You can either bring all the midtones to the darker side or the brighter side. A lot of times I'll just keep it at 1, just very much straight up in the middle. Make it a little darker. It's kind of the more sci-fi thing. And so I'll hit OK. Let's see, what else? If I zoom in here, if I'm really being real critical about it, you can see in this cow, you see kind of some of this artifacting, what they call, which is like these really sort of bad little edges that come up in like JPEGs and so on. A real easy way to fix some of that stuff is to use sort of a one of our filters here that we have. One that I like to use is this noise. Under this, it's filter noise, and if you go under dust and scratches, you can actually remove some of that stuff. So let me, and here's our preview box. So you can make adjustments. See how, like, when I click and move, I don't know if you can see that. Let me go closer. So I'm clicking and holding, and you can see sort of some of that artifacting. Can anyone see that? No? Yeah? Okay. So you're back here so you can see it, so that's good. That's good. So if I let go of this, as I'm dragging it around, you can see kind of it starts to it's disappearing, coming on and off. So this filter is really with a radius of 3 pixels, getting rid of that artifacting. I can bring this down to 2 pixels or 1 pixel. So it's a 1 pixel radius of sort of a blur a little bit of this artifacting stuff. So if I bring it up to 3 pixels, it's basically gone. Now there's a internal kind of compromise you have to make here. It also gets rid of some of the details. So if you look at this cow's face, and if I click and let go, you can see it turning on and off. I'm losing some of these little hair follicles, right? So maybe I want to go down 1 pixel. And I'm still losing it, but not as much. So then I'm happy, and then I say okay. Really subtle, but it helps. Let's see, what else? Okay, so we're good with that. I do want to show you how we can duplicate this. So there's a couple ways to duplicate a layer as well. I can actually, in the Layers panel, hold the Alt key, click and drag. And now as I hold the Alt key and click and drag, you can see my arrow is kind of turned into this double arrow with a black and white, and then I can let go, and then I have a UFO copy that's been created. So within this UFO copy folder, I have a duplicate of the same layers that are within the original. I can double click and rename this to UFO 2. I'll double click and rename this to UFO 2. All right. Now the thing is I can't see this. I'm going to bring this up to the very top. Oh, try that again. It's kind of a little fussy. Here we go. Move this back. All right, so I'm going to bring this to the top, and I'm going to actually make sure that my folder's selected, and I'm going to move this over. So one was directly on top of the other. That's kind of why we couldn't see it. For this one, I am going to hit Command T again for the transform, and then rotate this another way, make it smaller yet again, and then this piece is going to be further in the distance, okay, like that. This light will probably be from this vantage point. It's a little too bright, right? I want to make this lighter, so if I hit the starburst layer for my second UFO that I made, and actually hit this opacity option, I can hit the down arrow just on my keyboard and kind of reduce the amount of opacity to it, or the intensity. If I hold shift and click, it's going to go down by increments of 10. It's not giving me very much what I want, so I'll keep it at about 65% and then say that's all right. I'll zoom in a little bit more and say I want to refine this. I'll actually get my eraser tool. So over here in my palette, I'll hit the eraser tool. You can see it's very much like the brush tool. You can see kind of the preview of the size of it. Again, like a brush tool, I can increase or decrease it with the left and right brackets. And very much again like the brush tool, it's going to actually, it's almost exactly like the brush, but I can adjust the opacity as well. So 30%, this will be the intensity of the erase. So as I go back and forth over it, kind of brushing it, it's kind of fading it out more manually that way too. I'll make it smaller and keep kind of going. So this area too, it's a little bit awkward. So I can actually thicken this this kind of burst by just duplicating it in my layers palette. So I'll alt click and drag, and then it's actually kind of thickening it a little more. So then I made a duplicate layer on top of the other one. And then I'll take my eraser tool again, and then just with the more of an intensity of the eraser, I'll do it at like 75% opacity. I'll erase most of the outside stuff, but try and keep the inside stuff. I'll try and do it again. And again. And at this point, I can actually drag this up over the UFO 2 layer. Now, let me go in here. Actually, what I'll do is hit this UFO 2 layer and just kind of erase this black. Oh. Otherwise, I'll just kind of use my brush tool and kind of go over it. There. That's all right. So if I want to kind of compress everything in my folder, I can do that too. So if I don't want to have all these layers in my folder, which I would probably highly recommend, but if we want to make it a little more manageable, we don't need all these starburst layers. I can actually click on one, hold the shift key, click on the other, and then go down to merge layers. So I actually have all these selected, go into my more options menu up here, and then hit merge layers. And so that'll compress everything there. Another thing you'll probably want to do with an image like this is fade this back a little bit. So this is real crisp because it's in the foreground. This is a little bit less in the foreground, so it'll be a little blurrier back in the background, right, to kind of fool the eye a bit more, as much as we possibly can. So actually, I'll actually compress this entire folder with the folder selected, and then I'll, let me see, where is it at? Merge group. The quick option for that is Command E, but if I just hit merge group in this more options panel, that'll just compress that. Then next step I'll do is go to filter, and then let's see, where is it at? Blur. I want to blur it just a little bit, and typically Gaussian blur. Again, remember those ellipses, those are more options within. So if I hit the Gaussian blur tool, obviously 50 pixel blur is too much. I'll bring it to like a 1.5. Turn it on and off, kind of preview, see what that looks like. It's just enough. I'll hit OK. And then I'll even, again, I'll hold Alt, click, and drag off of that layer. It's actually adding that layer into my layers panel, so I can Alt, click, and drag a layer from layers, or I can Alt, click, and drag the selected layer on the canvas to do the same thing. And I'll just rename that 3. Oops. I didn't have that selected. So then I'll go transform, sort of rotate it a little bit more, bring it down so it's way in the background at this point, and bring it kind of closer here. Hit enter, and then finally I'll just go to blur again, and I'll just even further blur this thing, like by 3 pixels this time. And then, yeah, that's pretty much it. All right. The only, let's see, okay. Let's see, any other tools I want to go over today? One more tool. So this is our composition here for this. Is there any questions so far? Once you kind of dig in a little bit on your own stuff, you're going to be able to, you know, figure out which tools work best for you. Let me do one last tool. You see this thing? I don't know what this is. I'm going to clone stamp it. It looks like a mailbox or something, but maybe I just don't want that. Let me see what else I have back there. Just this big shadow. I'm not sure where that's coming from. A real easy way, and one of the more popular tools in Photoshop, is the clone stamp tool. So I'm hitting this cows layer because obviously that's where this image is coming from. All my UFOs are turned off at this point, so I'll turn them back on and select the cows layer. And I'll kind of zoom in here, and I'm going to demonstrate the clone stamp tool. So it's right here. That tool, the shortcut for that is S. So again, just like any other brush, you can increase or decrease the size with the left and right brackets. You can also adjust the opacity for this tool, so the intensity of the stamp. So the clone stamp tool very simply works like this. You use the Alt key to target an area on your canvas. So if I hold it down, and you can see I have a target now, and click on an area that I want to duplicate or stamp, I can just do so by holding the Alt key, clicking, and then releasing. Now, when I roll over the area where I want to copy that duplication, you can see kind of a preview of what it's going to look like in my, my stamp. Okay, so I'm actually going to click now and drag. So you can barely see it, but on my screen it shows me where I'm copying from down below. But I'm actually copying the bottom piece and just kind of going over the part that I want to cover up. You see how it kind of comes to the edge here and it kind of comes off? I have to then actually Alt-click and drag again to kind of go over that part. So it's a lot of just clicking an area and then painting over an area, clicking and painting over. You can actually turn down the opacity for this. So this is good for getting rid of like zits or something in photo, getting rid of like structures in the background that you don't want in your image or something like that. Duplicating more clouds if you wanted, or so on and so forth. So that's kind of really the purpose of that tool. In my experience, I mean, everyone has a different experience though, and uses different tools and so on. So if I turn the opacity down on this, I'll make it more obvious with a 15% opacity. Alt-click and then go over this part. You can see that I'm going over it, and little by little it's building up. It doesn't have as much coverage as the other one did. So if you want to very lightly go over an area, you can do that too. When you get to a point like this where it's kind of close to the leg and you don't want to like kind of really be too careful, use your selection. If I am on this cow's layer and I kind of really rough select this edge here, whatever I select will be the only thing that the clone stamp tool will affect. So I'll kind of hit my clone stamp tool again, go to my opacity and bring it to 100%, hit enter, make my selection really huge, right? I can be kind of messy with it now that I have this area specifically on this layer selected. I can just Alt-click and then just kind of really rough and go in here, and it's not going to go into the area that I had that is deselected. So okay. So Command D is deselect. It's a shortcut. Otherwise, I think you can go here and go deselect, but Command D or Command A, select all, or Command D, deselect, are two options that are widely used. And you can see I'll even go in here. This is a kind of an overlap area. I can just use my clone stamp tool to fix that little screw up. Get smaller. All right. So the combination of the tools, using selection tools as well, it can make everything kind of go real smoothly. So you don't have to be too careful around some of the edges. If you have an area that you trace out with a pen, trace out with a magnetic lasso, regular lasso, a polygon lasso, what else? All of our other tools, ellipse marquee. rectangular marquee, even in our quick mask mode, we can select something right with a brush. So I'm just kind of using my brush tool and just selecting this edge here, jump out of my quick mask mode. I can clone stamp some sky into this guy here. It's got a nice feather to it. So the combination of all these tools will really help you work really efficiently on anything. The big takeaway is selections.